The security cluster says it has intelligence that the recent looting and infrastructure damage are a result of a concerted effort to destabilise South Africa. Government has been criticised for not acting a little bit earlier. In his column in the Daily Maverick yesterday, Associate Editor Brooks Spector said there are lessons to be learned here from elsewhere in the world. Well, what are those? Let's bring him in now. Brooks, good afternoon. Thank you very much for your patience and welcome to the Midday View here on eNCA. I saw your opinion piece yesterday, and what drew me to it was the fact that you were saying that there could be underlying similarities and lessons that we might draw as South Africans from elsewhere in the world where there's been riots, looting, protests, and insurrections. Without going too much into detail because of time, at a high level, what are those similarities?
Good afternoon, Dan. I'm glad you read my articles. Thank you. What I was saying was, as you quite rightly point out, that what happened here over the last week is not totally unique. Other countries have had problems too, and the two examples that came to mind were in the United States. One back in the late 1960s with the death of Martin Luther King. It wasn't that there was an organized protest, organized rioting across the country, but there was an outgrowth because of a particular incident that all over the country in many black neighborhoods, people rose up, attacked stores and looted and did all those things, and there were people who died. That was without an organizing principle. But then I also said in the United States more recently, earlier this year, January 6th, there was an insurrection of a kind organized by a semi-populist president and his friends. This was the attempted taking over of the Capitol building. That clearly was organized, and it clearly was led, and it almost was successful, even though people expected something like that to happen. But then I cast my gaze a little further to one of my early overseas assignments as a diplomat in Indonesia in 1974. There was infighting within the ruling political party. There was suddenly economic growth. There were feelings of racial hostility and feelings that the money that was being made and the wealth that was being generated was certainly not reaching all the people in the country, and that all it would take would be a certain triggering event without organization, without actual planning, and then there would be terrible demonstrations and rioting and looting and killing and all the rest. But you dug a little deeper, and there were faction fights within the governing party that probably contributed to this as well. I guess the lesson we want to draw from all this, Dan, is that there's no one cause to these things, but there are any number of things, given the right circumstances, given the right dry timber out there. You can light one match and then your forest is in flames.
Well, in our case here recently, last week, that one match seemingly was the arrest of the former president, Jacob Gedleyihlekisa Zuma, and when he started his 15-month sentence for contempt of court, and people started protesting. And then by Friday evening, we saw a couple of trucks at the Mooi River toll gate on this major N3 highway between Durban and Johannesburg set on fire. And then the rest, as we say, we're standing here today, is like history. We've seen parts of our country burn like hell. Now, government today is saying they know who instigated this. And a senior member of the governing party, ANC, telling my colleague Stindelo Masigane a short while ago in Alex, that's in the person of Paul Mashatile, the Treasurer General, no, this has got nothing to do with factional battles within us, but these people are out of order. We are going to deal with them. The question still arises for us. I don't know where we can draw that lesson from. Who is behind this? Because this really borders on social insurrection.
No, it does. It quite clearly was an insurrection of a type. And I think what I draw from it, both from the conversations you had that I overheard on air and the admissions by government officials that they know who the people were, that there were a whole range of possible causes, and some people consciously took advantage of it, while other people simply saw it as an opportunity to get a month's worth of groceries. And the end result is it's going to be very difficult, I think, to sort of sit down and graph out 10% cause for here, 15 for that, 30% for the next thing. We're going to have to use a little more subtlety and a little more complexity in figuring out how all these different possible causes interact to give the firestorm that we've ended up with.
Watching what happened on Capitol Hill in Washington a few months ago with that insurrectionary attempt to occupy Capitol Hill, I wonder, and that's the oldest democracy in the world, I wonder if there's hope for us with the myriad of problems that we have in our country today.
Well, I mean, if you think of the Capitol Hill insurrection as the bottom of the well for American democracy, at the minimum, there'll be investigations and there'll be a special select committee in Congress looking very, very carefully at it. But I think it's generally understood that the Trump administration egged this one on, and they'd been feeding people such a basket of lies for so many months before that, that it was almost inevitable that if you brought that many people together, all of whom believed in the cause, quote unquote, that something terrible might happen. And if some of those people showed up armed, and if some of them had tactical training, the end result was pretty much what we all watched on television live as it happened. And the other lesson I think I should throw in there, which I didn't mention when we first started, was the example of Cuba, in which in the middle of a country in which demonstrations of any type really are just off the charts impossible, suddenly many people in many different cities and towns across the entire island rose up to protest the lack of services, the lack of food availability, even the lack of clean drinking water. And the contributing cause there is the increasing availability of social media and electronic internet communication among all the Cubans in the country. And this brings up the last part of, I think, of my analysis, which is that it is so much easier and so much quicker to generate things like this because we can all talk with each other with a cell phone. And South Africa, you and I, where we live now, there are something like 60 or 70 million cell phones in the country. Everybody has at least one.
Yeah, and we've seen the role of social media here. In conclusion, and very briefly, if we may, Brooks, when you end your Daily Maverick article, you point out that the real question is not to ask why has this happened in our country in South Africa, but rather why would have thought it would not be possible to happen here in this country? Because as you say, and I'm quoting you, the country was precariously poised near the lip of a caldera, and that it might only take one political potent event to light the fuse of a national calamity. And we are battling with that now, grappling with that, and everybody scrambling to draw it back from that. But you say the calamity will reverberate for days, weeks, months, and years to come. From the lessons you've shared with us, from the Martin Luther King protest after he was assassinated in the US, to Indonesia, to the Cuban example you've just given currently, going forward, what should we be doing? I mean, what kind of country like South Africa now? Because there's going to be a lot of social, political, cultural, racial, and economic setbacks and aftershocks.
Well, I mean, I think the bottom line really has to be some seriously resolute, determined leadership to say, we have had some terrible experiences and we must do better. We must reform X and Y and Z, and we must concentrate our energies, and we must do it all in a way which stays consistent to the laws and the Constitution of the country. Extra legal, extra constitutional activities probably aren't going to contribute to much of a solution. But I think the country really does look for, hope for, and wish for the kind of leadership that gets you away from the problem and toward a resolution. That sounds a little pie in the sky-ish, but I think that's ultimately what has to happen.
You need resolute leadership. And finally, briefly this time, Brooks, international reputation has been damaged. I mean, the images of this country in the last week on television screens across the world, I mean, it just put our image and reputation as a republic in tatters.
Well, just like you, I'm getting messages from friends around the world. What in the world is going on in South Africa? And I try to explain. And the problem is that it has an effect on potential investors and potential political and economic partners. They look at this and they say, maybe this isn't the place we want to look at. And that's where leadership has to step forward and say, we're going to fix this and we're going to make it better.
And fix it quick, fix it better, fix it quick. Thank you very much. Daily Maverick's Associate Editor, Brooks Spector.